Okay, hello. Good evening, everyone. It's great to have you all here. Thank you so much. My name is Marcia Eli, and I have the great pleasure on behalf of the Brooklyn Public Library, the library's Arts and Culture team, BPL Presents, and the Center for Brooklyn History, where we are, to welcome you. Tonight's program is about envisioning a future America that levels the economic playing field for everyone. It's inspired by Natalie Foster's book, The Guarantee, The Fight for America's Next Economy, which paints a picture and makes the argument that our government, the government of the wealthiest country on earth, can ensure the basic needs of every American: healthcare, housing, education, and that this is not a pipe dream, this is not socialism, but attainable economics with a precedent. Right now we have numerous parallel government-backed guarantees in the form of bailouts and bankruptcy protections and so on for the private sector. The only difference, the beneficiaries. So we are totally honored and excited to have Natalie at CBH tonight, along with another incredible visionary thinker, Tressie McMillan Cottom, two dynamos. Before I tell you more about them, I want to share a few things. Towards the end of the program, we're going to take questions from you. And as you came in, you were asked if you wanted an index card. You can write down a question on that card, and our ushers and folks will come and collect them, pass them to the sides. If you need a card or a pencil, we can give you those, and that's how we're going to, at the end, engage you in the conversation as well. I also want to share that we're very happy to have Natalie's book, The Guarantee, at the CBH shop. And following the conversation, she is very glad to sign copies. Now, let me tell you a little bit more about Natalie and Tressie, and then I'll turn it over to them. Natalie Foster is a leading architect of the movement to build an inclusive and resilient economy that works for all. President and co-founder of Economic Security Project, an Aspen Institute Fellow, her work and writing has appeared in the New York Times, USA Today, Time, Business Insider, CNN, and The Guardian. Natalie speaks regularly on economic security, the future of work, and the new political economy. She previously founded the sharing economy community Peers and co-founded Rebuild the Dream with Van Jones. She served as digital director for President Obama's Organizing for America, a leading partner in winning transformative healthcare reform. A daughter of a preacher from Kansas, Natalie draws on the value of community, dignity, and optimism to build a better America. She lives in Oakland, California, and The Guarantee is her first book. Dr. Tressie McMillan Cottom is a professor in the School of Information and Library Science and principal investigator in the Center for Information Technology and Public Life at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. She is also a New York Times Opinion columnist and a 2020 MacArthur Fellow. Recent accolades, I will qualify, accolades, because we can't name them all, include being named the 2023 winner of the Joseph B. and Toby Gittler Prize by Brandeis University for her, quote, critical perspective and analysis on some of the greatest social challenges we face today. McMillan Cottom's most recent book, Thick and Other Essays, was shortlisted for the National Book Award in Nonfiction. And here in Brooklyn, at the Brooklyn Public Library, we feel even more importantly, we must say that it won the Brooklyn Public Library's 2019 Literary Prize. So, without further ado, please help me welcome Natalie and Tressie.
Hello, everyone. How you doing, Brooklyn? Pleasure to be back. It's been a while. You guys holding it down? Yeah? Everything that I remember being here is still here? All right. Thank you. Hi, Natalie.
Hello, Dr. McMillan Cottom. It is such a joy to get to be here with you in Brooklyn.
Yeah, it really, really is. I'm glad that you have brought this book and this work to this space. I think this is my experience of this space is that it is an engaged, civic minded audience who cares deeply about the things that you write about and work on and care about deeply. So let's talk about this book, The Guarantee. Mine is a special copy. And I just like to show Inside the Fight for America's Next Economy. All right. So the book is great, and I don't say that lightly. I think I told you this is a big idea book, but without the slipperiness of details and concepts that I think tends to happen sometimes in big books where we make this trade-off between like what are the material conditions, what are the stakes, and then what's the idea. You do both. Right, you give us this idea, something we can hang a hat on, but then you walk us through. I think at one point you talk about that this is a practical approach that is not impossible in capitalism, that is compatible with capitalism, which I found interesting because I tend to think nothing's that compatible with capitalism. But one of the things I thought was really provocative in your book, which I agree with, by the way, but I'd love to hear you talk about it, which is that we are in a transitionary period between economic models. What is that transitionary period, and what's your vision for the guarantee? Why now? Why this moment for the guarantee?
Well, thank you for your kind words. They are very meaningful to hear. So thank you. And thank you for reading it. You're exactly the kind of person I was like, man, if she read this. So I am just really honored to get to be here talking about it with you. Whose scholarship I drew from in writing this book. So it's very meaningful to me. We are in a transition period. Indeed, the last 45 years of economic policymaking have been summed up, by really three tenets: total faith in the market, zero faith in government, and people left pulling themselves up by their bootstraps. And that was the orthodoxy that reigned on both sides of the aisle. And it is clear, I think the 2008 crisis marked a real turning point. It was clear that we can call it trickle-down economics or neoliberalism, but it was clear that the neoliberal emperor had no clothes in 2008 when 10 million people would lose their homes. Black and Latino families would lose half their collective wealth, and we would do very little to support them as a country. And I think we've been in transition since. And the question is what will replace it? And that is actually a set of options this country has. What I'm noting here is that there is a lot of reason to believe that we could usher in a guarantee economy, right, that guarantees a floor for everyone, regardless of race, religion, or zip code. I'm talking guarantee of housing, of healthcare, of income, of good work, family care, and so on. And that there's proof of concept now for how we would get there.
All right, let's talk a little bit about this proof of concept because I've been, on the bandwagon for. And you talk about these iterations. We've gone through, had a public discussion about UBI. We've had public conversations about reparations. We're having these public conversations about wealth inequality. All of this happening, sort of around this conversation. You're saying that the guarantee is sort of an umbrella for, right? So it doesn't sound that novel to me, but I am also aware of how novel it sounds to the general American public, right? What is the guarantee in practical terms? How does it change people's lives for the better, even if they don't maybe get the direct, payment, or they don't think they need a health insurance guarantee because they have good health insurance. All the canards people throw out. I like my doctor. I like my insurance. I own my home. I want to pass it down to my kids. What is the vision for the guarantee for everyone?
The vision for the guarantee for everyone is that it's a floor you could count on that provides this stability in life that is required for freedom, and I mean an interconnected communal freedom, like what Mia Birdsong talks about from her perch at Next River. Dignity and agency, presence, right? The ability to spend time with the people you love. That all requires security, economic security. And that is something that the richest nation on earth can deliver for us. And so, what would it look like in practical terms? It would mean a Maryland resident who could now move into housing that the Housing Authority in Montgomery County, Maryland has built that is on the transit line and it is kept permanently off the speculative market, meaning rents are flat and you can count on it and it's a small portion of your overall, income. That would be what housing guarantee could look like today.
And you're
For
saying,
someone in
because
Maryland.
when you say there's a proof of concept, you're saying these things already exist.
This is an example of housing investments and public housing investments that already exist and are being built today. For a parent, it would mean a check comes every month, part of the child tax credit that was passed in the American Rescue Plan, the expanded child tax credit. That would be the beginning of a guaranteed income that we could count on every month. That's what it would mean in people's lives. And you're exactly right to say it's an umbrella, right? Like that is actually, I've been heads down building the guaranteed income body of work, and it has gone into the mainstream. And perhaps we can talk more about that. But as I looked around, I thought it's not just my guarantee. It's the housing guarantee has become a very important national conversation. It's the healthcare guarantee. It's the family care guarantee. It is understood as something that we collectively must solve as a collective problem.
The family care one is actually one of my favorite pieces, by the way, because it's not often included in how we think about economic policy. And I will give this administration a lot of credit for how seriously they've taken care work as infrastructure work. Um, you know, there are lots of people where we are taking care of both children and parents and grandparents, not to mention on the spectrum of ability, how much care work is important. So often we narrow care work to just child care.
Yeah.
But when you say family care more broadly, we're talking about something sort of bigger. And I actually think that's an important piece because that actually does touch everybody.
It does
Family
touch
care.
everybody.
Yeah.
And we don't know when it will touch us. It is not a thing we can count on or know and plan for, right? I just was in Washington State, and Washington State has something called the Washington Cares Fund. And this is a long term care insurance, a social insurance program that everybody pays a little bit into. And when it's time for long term care, say for my aging parents, I draw out from that to guarantee I'm able to provide the long term care for my loved ones. That is a model of the guarantee that we have today functioning that we can scale federally if we decide, the guarantee economy is something that we want to build.
So let's talk about who the we are. The we are. Let's talk about the we. All right. Because you are surprisingly generous in this book with your personal narrative about how you do end up here doing economic policy from your perspective. Kansas, a PK, right? And this shapes and informs how you sort of think about the world, navigate policy. And I was thinking about how often I have been a person in a room where the policies being debated actually impact me directly, but nobody else in the room, right? For everybody else, it's theoretical, right? So you share a story about experiencing foreclosure that I think is important for us to think about. But I thought about this is why it was so important for you to be in the room for a conversation about housing or a conversation about healthcare. Um, what is it like to be in the room when the policies can directly impact you? And how do we get more people in the room included in that we to talk about what the guarantee looks like?
The bigger we.
Yes.
I love that. Yeah. And I, in 2008, really 2007, I had scraped together enough money to buy a home, which is, I had certainly bought into the story that was the American dream. And I was a organizer for the Sierra Club. And so I pulled it together. My family didn't own a home. We lived in the parsonage. So it was which is the home that the church owns. For those of you not schooled in church language. And so it was really exciting to me. And so I actually think it was literally weeks before it would become clear just how bad the housing crisis would be and how many loans would default and how Wall Street had really, set up a house of cards that would come tumbling down right on top of communities like the one I was living in. And so I bought a home, and it was just worth half its now
Overnight, like it lost all the value.
Yeah. And so I was actually one of the lucky ones. There were many who were not, of course, but I did feel a lot of shame. And so I felt like, man, I made a bad decision. How could I do that? I had overextended myself. And I didn't talk about it for a long time. And so, yeah, I think it's important that people who are closest to the problems are the ones solving the problems. And we're starting to see change in who we elect, but we're not as close as we should be. And I'd love to hear from you what it's like for you. I mean, you're probably in these academic rooms all the time where people speak with such remove about data and numbers. And you're saying that, oftentimes you feel alone is sort of what I heard in your question.
Yeah, alone. Well, I feel endowed with a certain type of experiential knowledge in those rooms. So from my perspective, it was often around student loan debt, for example, and I would be, at the American Enterprise Institute or whatever, one of these think tank places, and everybody's talking about default rates and loan balances and et cetera. And I just remember asking once, is anybody who in here had a student loan? And there were two people out of maybe a room of about 50. Two people had even ever had a student loan. And it came to mind because they were talking about something about the FAFSA or something. And and I said, no, that's not how that works. And I knew because I filled out a FAFSA. I lived and died by a FAFSA for 4 to 8 years of my life. And there was this only other person in the room who had a student loan did kind of seem embarrassed to admit it. And something that you talk about throughout the book, or you show these stories, it was really critical, I know, in the organizing that happened around student loan debt, to talk people through the shame of having experienced the social policy, right? When in fact, that is a superpower to my mind, to understand as you do both the data and to have sort of the lived experience of something like the mortgage crisis, which for a lot of people, yes, it impacted millions, but for a lot of people was a time of great wealth consolidation. And so I think of it as like a superpower, but you have to have both sides of that equation.
I really love that. One of the stories Astra Taylor tells, and I track her organizing work as the example of how the idea of debt-free college has become more mainstream over the years. The kind of things that would have been laughed out of the room in previous administrations now are rose garden events in this administration, as $140 billion have been canceled outright, as years went by where no one had to pay that monthly payment because we put a moratorium on student debt payment during the during COVID. And so Astra story, starts buying up debt on the secondary market, which you can't actually do with student debt, but as you know, but was doing it with healthcare debt to sort of prove that this is, a way that this is all predatory and there is another way. And realizes we're never going to get the policy change we need. We actually need to make college debt free and to abolish student debt. So it's policy. So it starts organizing debtors through the debt collective. And it was there that became cathartic to talk about the shame people were carrying with them. from this economy that tells us it's our fault if we aren't making it, despite the fact the game is rigged. And in fact, we're able to turn that shame into a superpower, like you're saying, and become an organizing driver for the debt collective.
How do you talk people through the shame in having them see the guarantee as something that will positively impact them? I'm thinking about housing. There's a lot of organizing right now, tenants' rights and housing market. You talk about student loan debt, the organizing that has happened there. Some organizing maybe in healthcare, and I'm not sure. I felt like that one had quite as much energy, but but ground zero, I think, across all of those is like getting people to understand that they are not an individual in this situation. And that seems to me to be a hurdle to talking about the guarantee economy, for people to get them excited. We've said the word earlier, evangelical, about the guarantee. So, how do we do that? How have you done that?
Well, I'm going to answer, and then I'd love to hear. You mentioned you've been spending more time with tenant organizers. I'd love to hear what that project is, if you're willing to share,
All
and
right.
what you're
Yeah.
learning
Okay.
too. Um, I think that one of the key things is to understand that we are not alone. And that the system is rigged, and that together the only way forward for a collective solution is in the togetherness and expanding the we, uh, in solidarity, essentially. And once people start to get a taste of what it would mean, then it's so much easier, because it's true, we're all a product of the neoliberal waters in which we've been raised. The story that tells us, it is our fault.
COVID, I feel like, broke that for us a little bit. So you talk about the 2008 inflection point, but I thought a lot in this book about what COVID, and you do talk about this at the end, because you sort of take us through these like chronological eras of like the transition to a guarantee economy and the work that's been done to build the foundation for that. Um, and I thought COVID happened.
Yeah.
And people experience a social contract for millions of Americans for the first time in their lives, getting direct assistance from the government, not having it wrapped in shame because you didn't have to go down to like a welfare office to get it, right? And prove that you were poor enough or destitute enough or deserving enough. But I mean, we have to be honest, we rolled a lot of that back.
Mm-hmm. We have, and our interconnectedness, literally the air we breathe, right, became a shared project in COVID. And so I do think it broke it open. And yes, we have rolled a lot back, but there is also, I think we're all just beginning to grapple with what we did do. We did things that I was told were never possible in the
Like
United
what?
States of
Like
America. Like a national eviction moratorium that kept people safe in their homes. We gave people rental assistance and mortgage assistance to pay their rent and mortgage to keep them in their homes. We literally bought hotels, okay? We bought a hotel on my block in Oakland, the government, and we moved the unhoused in the midst of a crisis because we knew it wasn't safe to be on the street. It's never safe to be on the street. But we moved people in and we gave them a key to a room of their own in a way that that was man on the moon style thinking about the housing crisis. These are the kinds of things that we were doing. And so to me, that is just the beginning, not the end, just the beginning of what is possible. But wait, if you're game, I'd love to come back to the tenant organizers
yeah, let me
here
off on that one. Okay,
and
so I've
housing
been speaking. Yeah. So
and the story that you're finding resonates.
yes, a story around collectivism, actually,
Yes.
which I found really interesting. So one of the things that I am passionate about doing is taking these stories about social movements and social change and collective action outside of the Bay Area. In the New York, I love y'all, but you dominate a lot of the news cycle. Okay. And so one of the things I found fascinating is I know this guy, the powerhouse of a guy who is doing this organizing in Kentucky, Louisville, Kentucky. So depending on how you think about it, Louisville is kind of the South. You can it's an interesting place. It's a border state and culturally a little southern, a little Appalachian. It's very complex. But what it isn't, again, is coastal. It is in that sort of has the vestiges of the plantation economy, right? You go there and it feels very much like the South. And so I thought, well, what does it look like to do tenants' rights organizing in the South, outside of a place where you have at least a concept of social housing, right? We don't have a concept of that in the South, not really. Um, uh, and because we are not threatened with density in the South, we've got plenty of land. We got plenty of places to put people. When we don't build housing, it is quite literally a deliberate choice. It isn't because we have too many people. And so I spent a week with the organizers there, going out with them, doing actions, canvassing, knocking on doors at public housing communities. And what they are targeting are these apartment buildings that are owned by out-of-state landlords, right? Who get these contracts to run housing that's owned by the government, and they get a contract for cheap, and then do a lot of, as you might expect, a lot of profit extraction. And what I found really fascinating is how upbeat that work was for them. Like it was a lot of fun. Right, hanging out with them and canvassing with them, the energy of that was almost spiritual. Kind of gonna come back to this evangelical thing. And I thought, one, that I think more people need to see that, because I think organizing and it is a lot of hard work, but I don't think we talk enough about the joys we can get from collectivism. That these were deeply happy people having an enjoyable time trying to bring down out of state landlords. And that could be really interesting and fun, and it builds community in a way. And one of the things that I talked to them a lot about was the opportunity they saw after COVID, right? Because of the things that you're talking about. People said, wait, we could have been doing this the whole time? Right. And that opened up the imagination in a place where we don't have a long, deep history of rent control and tenant ownership, right? And so teaching people a whole new language, which I think is part of the challenge, teaching people a whole new language, like around a guarantee.
Yeah, a whole new language and a whole new story, a story that they see themselves in and see themselves a part of, and a belief that it could be better and that they deserve better. We deserve better.
You've got a quote. You tackle this head on throughout the text. And I was looking here. I wrote it down somewhere. You've got a quote where you say, very straightforward, we don't get here, however, you say, we don't get to a guarantee unless we reckon with the fact that one of the reasons why we don't have more guarantees is because we can't get white America to buy into a multiracial vision. I'm paraphrasing, right?
Yeah.
But you tackle this head on. And I would be remiss if I didn't say, let's see, your book ends in 2022, which is good because the book has to end. It's great. But we're in 2024 and a lot's happened. Right? I think 2022, as like challenging as it was, felt more hopeful than maybe 2024 does on that front.
Yes.
All right. So what are we doing? How are we talking about a guarantee in this, what I would consider a white reclamation movement happening across this country and really across Europe and across lots of places, but in this country in particular, sort of this white reclamation where we can't say diversity. We can't say DEI. I'm in North Carolina where they just stripped all DEI from the state legislation of higher education and fired all the DEI officers. And that's happening state after state after state, where we have turned the idea of multiracial into quote unquote wokeism, this slur. So how do we tackle throughout the book, all of the successful movements you point out are very intentionally multiracial, right? For this to work, especially in like the healthcare sector where that's been hugely important, the labor union organizing. So how do we talk about a guarantee in this context?
Yeah, I think that's a really important one. I mean, one thing I'll say is I very much agree with you in the moment we're in. We are seeing the pendulum swing, and we know this enemy. We've seen this enemy before, and we've made progress despite this enemy in the past. And I do think what we're seeing is a reaction to the progress that has been made. And sometimes it feels like one step forward, two steps backwards. But it is the multiracial solidarity and the multiracial organizing ultimately that will get us there. And we only need enough white people to win to get us there.
That's always been my theory. We don't need everybody. We just
don't
need
need them
enough.
all. Yeah. And so I think we be strategic about it. We understand the playing field that we are on. But let me tell you the story of Minnesota, because I find it really heartening. For the past decade, there has been very intentional multiracial organizing done across gender, race, and religion. The Muslim community has come together with the Jewish community and the Christian community to organize in Minnesota. And they're not just doing it around issues, they're doing it around elections. And they are electing candidates out of their communities. And they have now have the governorship, the state, and the Senate, and have been able to pass extraordinary guarantee-like policies. I'm talking like $1 billion into childcare to help both. Yes, let's hear it for childcare.
Yeah.
To help
Minnesota and childcare.
Yes, both families who are who are having to pay for childcare, which if you've paid, you know it is like a college tuition when your child is 2. And for the wages of the caregivers that have to be living wages so that they can put food on the table and pay rent and thrive in their own families. Minnesota has been able to pass an expanded child tax credit to put money back into parents' pockets. There is free school lunches around the state. Many are calling it the Minnesota miracle. Nah. It's the Minnesota decade of multiracial organizing that has landed us in this place. And to me, it's what is possible in this country if we invest in organizing.
Why is it important? One of the fundamental guarantees you've got is dignified work, right? And one of the ways you have approached this is give people money. Give people money, which I actually think we struggle with in America. Just like give people money, like instead of having a fundraiser or like doing donate, just give people money. Just give people money. And so over and over again, you say, yeah, just give people money. Why is it important to just give people money, Natalie?
Why? Well, one, if you just give people money, we can abolish poverty in this country. We could end poverty in this country. I've got some snaps for that.
Ending poverty, good.
Yes.
Ending poverty, good.
And I think giving people money is important. I also think a dignified work, a dignified job is important too. And I think they sit side by side with one another. One of the things we know from the COVID era is that when people had stimulus checks, the expanded child tax credit, unemployment insurance, when people had a bit more money in their pockets, they did in fact quit their jobs, right? It was often called the great renegotiation or the great resignation in our parlance. But it actually was the great renegotiation, as Nicole Mason framed up, because people were actually finding work at higher rates than they were quitting. That was the story that the media wasn't telling us. Workers were renegotiating wages and their relationship with employers because they had a bit more economic security in their pockets and could, in fact, walk off a job that wasn't treating them well and find another job that was. And that actually mirrors what we found in Stockton. When we gave people money, in the case of Stockton, California, it was a demonstration of a guaranteed income, $500 a month. Something as simple as $500 a month meant people were able to find full-time work at double the rate of the people who weren't.
How does the correlation between the 500 and finding better work, like what, because they can spend it on transportation or like just having the
investing in themselves, the ability to go interview for a job you don't think you're going to get, but you have that extra 5 hours to do it, to even look for a job around you that maybe is closer to home or with the hours end at 3 o'clock so you can pick your kid up. All of that is impossible to do if you are always working.
I think about the reason why I tease that out is because we think about money and the old, especially from economy circles, has been if you just give people money, they'll waste it.
Mm.
They'll spend it on vice. They'll blow it on gambling. They'll waste the money. And instead, what you found over and over and over again is that people use it for resilience, for economic resilience instead.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And they know where every cent is going. It's the opposite of waste. It's actually extraordinary.
Nobody knows how much money they have more than people who don't have enough money, in my experience. They know exactly how much they have at all times. At all times.
All times.
Questions are coming around. If you haven't had a chance to get a card, now is a great time. All right. One more while they're gathering our questions. One of the things that I found really funny in your book, because I was like, yeah, okay, I'll give it to you, is how much of this policy, this transformative policy, has been packaged as boring policy. Why is it important for this to not? Because I think, I tend to err on the side of tell a great story. Let's make it sexy. Let's make everybody understand, right? And you're like, no, actually, boring policy has a place. Let's make it boring. Why should the guarantee, or at least some of this, be boring policy?
Well, today, Dr. McMillan Cottom, I'm going to yes and this because I do think the polling numbers we are seeing right now today is necessitating that we tell a bigger, sexier story about what is possible with this economy. People want a different future. And I
agree. Strong agree.
So I am very much in your camp. The point I was making, one of the ways I was framing that up is that Joe Biden and this administration that happened to be the administration during the era of COVID, of course, it started under Donald Trump, but then it would be Joe Biden, that there was a lot of extraordinary things happening that came with boring names. So one of them we've talked a bit about, but the expanded child tax credit, it actually polls very well. It sounds milquetoast. And it's radical. It's giving parents money. To your point, you don't go stand in a line. No inspectors come to your home. There's not some long form that asks you exactly how you spent the money. It just was in parents' bank accounts almost within weeks of Congress passing the American Rescue Plan. And so it was an extraordinary break with how we've done policy in the past. And I believe it will be part of our future social contract. It is coming. We will pass it and we will make it the law of the land.
All right.
It's just not there right
losing
now.
It was that was a big blow.
It was a big blow. Yeah, there was a political calculation. And for those of you not deeply following the child tax credit, there were 6 months that were built into the American Rescue Plan, with the thesis being, once the checks start coming, you'll never be able to pull them away. Well, that was a political calculation that proved not to be true, unfortunately. Really,
we underestimated
other side. The other side and one man named Joe Manchin. Because you had every other Democrat who voted for the child tax credit, and we got very, very close. Now, the good news is that it's happening at the states. We've doubled the number of states that have passed a child tax credit at the state level. So it is becoming the kind of thing people are getting used to. They know they deserve. And within the laboratories of democracy, there is proof, when the next opening happens.
What I loved is you said if you make it boring, if you make radical policy boring when you're passing it, it also doesn't get the other side riled up. They don't see it coming, which I was like, okay, I'll concede that point. All right. Do we have questions coming up for us?
While we're waiting, we could talk a little bit about college.
Yeah, we can talk a little bit about college.
Because I would love to hear some of your thoughts on how that movement is going. I talk a little bit about Astra and I've talked a little bit about the billions of dollars, but this quote from you has stuck with me. So can I just read it?
What are you doing? Okay.
You said it's not the student debtors who should be ashamed. Well, I say this part. It's the lawmakers who pave the way for loans to turn. And you say the greatest vehicle of social mobility into a debt machine. Yeah. And that was the rise of student loans and the idea that it's a personal investment we're supposed to make in ourselves and not a public good.
Yeah. It was the end of the public good of education, which is also a story about as higher education became more multiracial, right? The public divested in
That's
it.
right.
And so student debt, I like to say, people, is the consequence. The problem is that states stopped funding at the same share their higher education systems when they became dominated by women and more multiracial. I think as often is the case with social policy in our country, like the earned income tax credit, by the way, is that the policies that are the most contentious aren't the ones that fail. They're the ones that succeed, right? So the problem was that higher education access, publicly subsidized higher education, worked for upward social mobility, not that it failed. So the shift to student loans was a deliberate choice about trying to undermine a program that actually worked the way that it was intended. And the takeaway there for me has always been anytime the policy discussion transforms any sort of collective idea into an individual voucher program of any kind, usually hidden in there is a place where people are going to be able to profit from people's desire for mobility without giving them real mobility. Like where we are now, though, I mean, I've been very I'm radical in the debt forgiveness plan. I said, make them take you to court, Joe. Make them sue you. Like I just thought we needed to keep it on the table. And for a while, that was a radical idea. But then he did it, so I'll give him that. Right, he did it. But I do also think that, like Astra Taylor and so many of the people that you talk about in this book, who I've also talked to over the years, I think it's important to be the crazy sounding person in the room. Right. And I think sometimes partly that's my job to just keep saying, no, let them sue you. Go. Right. But at the end of the day, I will give them credit. What has been most significant has been the boring policy changes they've made to the student loan programs. So most of the student loan debt forgiveness has come through tweaks of the program, refining it, streamlining it, making it work better. And I'll give them credit for that. So that's where I think we are.
Well, and one of the things you did was say those things in the nation's paper of record. You didn't say
That's what
it
we hope I
on,
do.
I mean, you're saying it on TikTok too, which if y'all aren't following her TikTok, I highly recommend.
About the TikTok.
But
Don't go there. Don't go there.
But you said it in the New York Times, right? And it's so important to be able to have that legitimization. I actually framed the book up, there's first sort of the provocation period where you're provoking the big ideas, right? Abolish student debt, debt-free college. But then it gets legitimized. And it gets legitimized through things like New York Times columns and through states who do it and mayors who do it. And then you can win.
Yep. Then you can win. Thank you for that, because I actually do think that's what my job is at the Times, to counter what some of my other colleagues write about student loan debt. I do. That is my job. Woo-hoo! Because I learned early on, everybody reads that damn paper.
Well, especially now.
I was
stunned.
Yeah, I was stunned to find out. Okay, so here we got some questions coming in. I like this one. How can philanthropy further catalyze the guaranteed income movement, without co-opting it? I think that's interesting because you got some great stories in the book, but also the philanthropy world too. I mean, you're out there trying to organize. So, one, can that happen? And what would that look like?
Yeah. I did spill a little tea on some of the philanthropy stories we had as we were trying to get the guaranteed income work off the ground, namely a number of billionaires who passed on the work in Stockton led by Mayor Michael Tubbs. And it's funny because, they all fancy themselves a really keen eye of things that will scale well. And they missed that one. But luckily, we figured out how to raise that money. But I think this is a really important question. I see philanthropy as funding R&D, the research and development for these big ideas. So I'm just going to use the case of Stockton. in that instance, and in Jackson, Mississippi, where Aisha Yandaro runs Magnolia Mothers Trust. These two pilots started around the same time, about 8 years ago. They were the first modern pilots to be announced. Everybody thought it was nuts. Philanthropy wanted nothing to do with it. You can't just give people money. It doesn't work that way. It was much easier to fund the research, for example, than the actual disbursements of cash, which is what you need to do the work. And so it would be philanthropy that would fund the R&D, get it off the ground, ultimately, a lot of individual donors, but also foundations. And then philanthropy also needs to invest in the policy work to scale these ideas, right? These ideas have to be codified into law, and that happens through advocacy and research and power building, which gets to my third thing. Philanthropy needs to fund the power building to get these organizations to the place where they can elect people who believe in the guarantee and hold them accountable to creating the guarantees.
I think sometimes, we tend to think of philanthropy as like being visionary, but I actually find that they follow more than they lead. And so, I don't know. Like
That's actually good.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
I like that,
Yeah.
those philanthropists
Okay.
the most.
I like this question because this ties into a couple other questions that are along this vein. So I'm going to roll these up into one, everybody, which is this is really questions about where will the money come from all of these big projects, these big ideas, and how can then somebody ask, how can we successfully extract more taxes from the wealthy? And I think those two things kind of go together. That's why I'm going to roll it up into one. So how do we pay for it?
Yes.
And how do we get the money from the people who can pay for it?
This country always finds money for what this country decides is important.
Yeah.
So it is not a question of how we pay for it. Though I'm happy to talk about the specifics of things like a financial transaction tax, which would be a small fee on high frequency trading that would generate billions of dollars. The think tanks shelves like the Roosevelt Institute are just filled with ways you could generate the money in today's economy. We just have to have the political will to get there. Now, that said, there is a fight coming that's going to be very important. And that's not just in November, which is the contest for the future, yes, the election. But in 2025, the Trump tax cuts expire. These tax cuts have meant that the 39 biggest companies in this country pay $0 in federal taxes, yet reap billions and billions and billions of dollars in profit. They mean that the wealthiest, the ultra wealthy, have literally gotten tax cuts, like $70,000 per ultra wealthy person tax cut during the last many years that this has been our tax policy. So they're expiring. Regardless of who's in office, there will be a tax fight in America. So kind of looping back to that philanthropic question, if one has philanthropic means, one should be investing in organizations to fight those tax battles, to say, and here's the good news, it polls really well across every political stripe, young and old, across race and gender. People want to tax the wealthy, and they want the wealthy to pay their fair share in taxes. So I believe we can get there if we can push those in office to really pick a fight for it. If the entire next year is about how much taxes wealthy people should be paying in America, that's actually a really good scenario for the guarantees.
I do feel like we should be saying 2025 a lot. You know why? Because the other side is saying it a lot. They've got a roadmap to 2025, a grand vision and a plan for 2025. If you haven't looked it up and read it, look it up when you aren't going to be home alone at night. And
maybe you'll do a TikTok about it.
Maybe I'll do a TikTok about it. And we need a counter vision. I think we should be out there with 2025 in mind. Exactly right. Since we are aware that facts and data alone cannot change hearts and minds, got cognitive dissonance, and I would say sometimes just outright willful ignorance. How do we convert enough white folks in particular to believe that this is both possible and I like this part of the question because I think you got to answer here in line with American values. Because you start seeing guarantee, it was mentioned earlier, and people hear socialism, which I don't think is a dirty word, but many people do. And so, how do we say that this is compatible with American values?
Yeah. Guarantees are foundational to capitalism. To do business in this country, you enjoy all kinds of guarantees. The guarantee of the patent system, of the monetary system, of courts. We have shareholder liability that means you are not personally held responsible for any corporate activity, and that's guaranteed. Right? So I'm arguing that we should extend the guarantees to everyday people who make this economy work and are the true engines of economic growth in this country. So that's, I think, one way to frame up the guarantees as an American value. I think there are other cross-partisan, I won't say bipartisan, because I don't know if I believe in bipartisanship today.
Okay.
But cross-partisan meaning there are times you can come together with the other side and come from very different values but land on a similar policy. And I think there's a growing movement on the right that wants to invest in families and is very concerned about birth rates and so forth. Yep.
Yeah.
But if that's your main goal, then there's no question you should be passing things like the expanded child tax credit and investing in childcare and investing in, free school lunches and those kinds of questions. So I think that's another way to try and find common ground.
Yeah, I get scared on that one because we're
I
talking about we got
understand
two
why.
different definitions of family values when they talk about family values.
That's right.
The ones we're trying to protect.
And how we define
Mhm.
families, right? In a much more expansive way of how we should be defining
Yeah.
families.
All right, I had a question. I just lost it, so I'm going to go off the top of my head. But I do think it's a good question. Maybe, and I might expand it a little bit because I think what we're maybe getting at with this question is this is not a fertile environment for progressive legislation. You've got, by some estimations, a radical court, or at least a court that doesn't share this current administration's vision, obviously, either. And you've got the way you just sort of defines that you don't want to say bipartisanship. And that's because we have seen the intentional gridlock in Congress. And I think we all expect there's going to be more of all of that. How do we push forward a guarantee agenda in this climate, this court, this Congress, this climate where it seems to be more about um, resistance than progress?
Well, first of all, we have this Congress, for 5 more months, and then the whole chessboard gets reshuffled. So we need to be ready in every scenario for how we move the guarantees forward. One of the things I was heartened by is that in 2016, right after Donald Trump was elected, I say we could have been forgiven for not moving the guarantees forward because there was so much defense that had to happen on things that we cared about. But instead, you actually saw the defense happen, yes, but you saw the guarantees move forward in that very dark time in this country's history. So that is one thing I will offer. The other thing I'll say is that if you had told me 10 years ago that we would have a moment in history where unions are popular again, like so popular, like at the height of their popularity, and that we would be unionizing an auto plant in the South.
Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah, that
For
was a
the
good
first time in 40 years, I wouldn't have believed you.
one.
Let's clap.
Tennessee, y'all. So shout out to the South, where I just think some really exciting things are happening. But since somebody mentioned geography, well, in here, I think we're good on time. Yes. Um, since you bring up location geography, this one says, as a Kansan, what do you think about populism? And is the guarantee a new name for it? Are we just talking about populism when we talk about a guarantee?
I would also love your reflections on this question too,
Yeah.
Dr. McMillan Cottom. You know, yesterday, the day before, David Leonhardt had a piece in the New York Times calling it neo-populism. And he's talking about a belief that neoliberalism, as we've defined it, the last 45 years of policymaking, total faith in the markets, that era is over, and that there is signs of that is true across both sides of the aisle, and that there is a neo-populism growing that does not believe the market will solve our problems. I found that to be an interesting way of framing it up. I call it the guarantee because I think it's important to name what we're for.
Yeah.
But I do see energy that says, I want a different future playing out all across this country. And politicians need to heed that.
You make a point in the book that I think ties into this, and so this will be my answer to that, which would actually to channel what you said, what you say in your book, which is populism actually got us here. We just don't always see it as such. So you talk about this moment. You say Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump are both responding to a populist energy, right? It's just that they are selling different visions, right? But they are responding to sort of that same fear, dissonance, sort of people aren't, I think, meant to live in like a state of suspended fear the way that we, and anxiety the way that we do now. And that primes our most tribal of behaviors. And what you can have is you can have a political narrative ready to go that tells people how to move forward, as I would argue, like Bernie Sanders was trying to argue, or you can have the Trump vision, which sells a type of populism that says, no, you reclaim and you blame, find somebody to blame, right? I think part of the problem is that I'm not sure we have always been willing to accept our populism on the left or, left of center or whatever. I don't think we're as comfortable with our populism, right? But every successful collective action group that you highlight in the book, to my mind, came from agitated from outside of the center of politics. Student debt. You talk about how crazy people looked at you when you said give people money. I remember being in a room and actual laughing. I don't mean they could have laughed at me. I mean, they actually laughed at me when I said, no, you're just going to have to cancel it. Like, we had gotten ourselves into such a quagmire with student loan debt policy that I said, you're going to have to clear the balance sheet. You actually can't make now progressive policy on top of what we now have. It's too regressive. And they laughed.
Yeah.
It will never happen. I don't think it was 18 months later where it was mainstream political policy coming from like Elizabeth Warren saying student loan debt cancellation. That's the left. That's populism.
That's right.
To my mind.
That's right.
But we just don't always like it when we do it.
And then who would be the one to cancel the student debt, to actually do it? It would be the most moderate of the bunch.
That's true.
2020 was a primary of ideas. Guarantees were throughout the different candidates running on the left side of the aisle, on the Democratic ticket. And it would be the most moderate of the bunch who would win and do something like cancel student debt, do something like pass an eviction moratorium. And it is not because Joe Biden is truly an economic populist. It is because we had changed the temperature in the room, and politicians take the temperature. They know how to read the winds that are blowing, and they move in that direction. And that is what he was responding to. And the one other point I'll make about him, he's 81 years old. He remembers a period of time when government played a role in creating markets and shaping outcomes. He is pre-neoliberal. And I actually
I
think that's
wonder if you could
important
get
here.
him. I wonder if you could get him to pick that up as a campaign slogan.
I'm pre-neoliberal,
I've been
people.
here so long. I remember the before times. Vote for me, Joe.
That's right.
I'm hungry. Y'all shouldn't put me up here when I haven't had protein. Okay. I will say, as somebody who said we're going to have to wait and see with Biden's administration, I am pleasant. I don't want to say pleasantly, but things have happened. Things have definitely happened, and they have happened in ways where if you weren't like really paying attention to the details, you didn't realize it was happening. So, like the Green New Deal happening through climate policy, right? Like that's an economic policy, and I can see that.
Wait, let's tease that one out real quick. 'Cause
Yeah.
that's actually what you just said is really important.
Yeah.
I don't think people see that. The Green New Deal was like young people sitting in saying, I want a different climate future. You need to structure markets. You need to give people good jobs to get us there. It's industrial policy. That was not what Democrats were talking about at the time. The climate movement was still talking about cap and trade, which is something completely different. It's a market intervention. It's a market's way of trying to solve things. The Green New Deal was saying this is something we build right here in America and we do it with good jobs. And that would change the discourse. That would change history. And I think it paved the way for something like the IRA to pass, the Inflation Reduction Act, which would be the most consequential climate legislation of my lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a direct line back to the kids who sat in
Yep.
the offices
Yep.
again and again.
Agree. I suspect we got some of those in the audience. You want to give you? All right, go ahead. Tell me your last one. Shout it out and I'll repeat it so people can hear.
Yeah.
All right. So the question, and I'm going to try here, make sure I get all your high points, okay? Which is so much of the cross partisanship that I think you talked about tends to happen around when it comes to family values and family care policies, tends to focus on children before they're born, basically, doesn't care about them over the life course or see that as investing in family care and family infrastructure. How do we get people, both sides of that? I know I hate all of these euphemisms because they really limit our imagination, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
How do we get people to the table on understanding the infrastructure for family care to extend beyond pregnancy? Is that good? All right.
I think that's a really important question. I want to be clear that right now we are not seeing that cross partisanship play out. That the right of center side of the aisle is not showing up to vote for things that invest in families of any size.
And we need to say that more
loud and clear.
Yeah.
So I was simply responding to the notion of like, where could you see people coming together? Is that even a possibility? And I wonder if that is a space that's possible. You know, there is some green shoots right of center of new kinds of organizations trying to build that understanding, but it hasn't translated into votes yet. And until it does, then there's not a whole lot of point of reaching across the aisle.
The radical Republicans we got now come from their far right, and to your point, I just don't. I will say one place I do think it might be possible, and I'm biased here because I talk to people on the ground who do this kind of work. I think there's some imagination around like elder care, if only because people see that one as being a little less politicized. Because when you talk about reproductive rights, people automatically think about abortion and abortion rights, and you start talking about children. But elder care is this way to extend our imagination about family care. I don't know. I tend to think that there might be something there. I don't know. So, yes, self-interest. Old boomers, there's a lot of self-interest.
That's right. And I talk to so many people my age who lay awake at night very stressed about how they're going to find care for their parents. And
Who
that is
all
a
here is
universal
subsidizing their
problem.
parents right now?
Mm.
Afraid that you're going to have to be doing it soon. Yeah. See, I think there's something
Absolutely.
there.
Right. And the old story said it's your own problem to figure out on your own, maybe with a set of friends on like the chat, but it's your job.
Yeah.
The news story says no, that is a collective problem that we can solve collectively if we invest in it.
Thank you very much. And with that, we've got a transition. Do you want to come up? Shall I do our introduction here? So we have a wonderful, I think, treat for the
Mm-hmm.
audience is how I would describe it. We've talked about a little bit here about the energy of doing like this work and how important I think it is to see it, the imagination, the potential of this work beyond the sort of like nitty gritty white paper policy work, as important as that is. It's not that fun.
The
But
New
you know
York
what
Times
is fun?
columnist.
Art. Art is fun.
Art is
We
fun.
like art and we love artists. Artists are workers who deserve respect, dignity, and economic security. I think we all saw that, especially during COVID. How many of us turned and reached for art when we were feeling isolated and realized we hadn't supported artists enough? Creatives Rebuild New York joins the movement for economic justice through a guaranteed income for artists program. If you want cool art, you're going to have to pay artists, by the way, y'all. They need places to live. One of the largest in the U.S., supporting 2,400 artists across New York State with monthly $1,000, no strings attached cash payments for 18 months. Yeah. To close out our program, we have the great privilege to hear from one of these artist participants, Koku Ganza, a singer, songwriter, guitarist, and independent musician who is creating her own organic universe inspired by beauty from her Tanzanian roots. Welcome to the stage.
Hello. Okay. Okay. So I am Koku Ganza. I am a singer songwriter. I've lived in New York for some time. My family is originally from Tanzania, and I've been just working as a musician since I've lived here. A long story short, so during COVID, a lot of venues just weren't happening, a lot of gigs weren't happening, a lot of tours got canceled for me, and I had a hard time finding work. So ended up doing a lot of different odd jobs. Started a business during that time to try and get some money going. And when Creatives Rebuild New York happened, a little bit post COVID for me, I was so grateful to have that opportunity come along because I was able to fund my EP that I am about to release in July. So during that time, yes, I was able to stay creative and not worry about rent so much, but stay in a creative space. And I'm just really grateful for the opportunity. And I think it's a magical experience to not have to worry and just be able to work in a space that you want to work in and stay creative. So please clap if you'd like. Oh, 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 oh. Yeah, 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 yeah. It's the beginning of you and I. Sun in the mirror, flare reflecting light. And I think that you're great, baby. You think I'm fine. We're the perfect combination, like wind dancing in the sky. Ooh, you got me open, curious for more of your magnetic magic. Magnetic magic. Magnetic magic. Oh. Magnetic magic. Gold is my favorite new color. That looks great on you. Words without conversation. When access to cruise. Oh, I like to you talk. Baby, I like to watch me walk away. It's the perfect combination. I love is here to stay. Ooh, you got me open, curious to more of your magnetic magic. Magnetic magic. Magnetic magic. Oh. Magnetic magic. Yeah. My soul, baby. Could I be yours, eclectic lady? My soul, baby. Could I be yours, eclectic lady? Could I be yours? 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 Thank you. Thank you. I have one more. It's one of my favorite songs. My father used to sing it to me. It's an old East African song. Some of you might know this song. Malaika, nakupenda malaika. Malaika, nakupenda malaika. Ingekuwa maliwe, ingekuwa dada. Nashindwa na mali sina we, ingekuwa malaika. Nashindwa na mali sina we, ingekuwa malaika. Pesa zasambua roho yangu. Pesa zasambua roho yangu. Nami nifanye je kijana mwenzio. Nashindwa na mali sina we, ingekuwa malaika. Nashindwa na mali sina we, ingekuwa malaika. So the translation of this song, it's Malaika, she is an angel, and it's a man, he's singing to her, he's telling her he has no money, he has no home, he has no food, all he has is love. Sounds really beautiful in Swahili, right? I don't know if the man told me all of those things, I don't know. Probably run away. But it sounds really beautiful. Malaika, my angel. Malaika, my angel. Thank you for listening.